Hey, good afternoon, YouTube. Welcome back to Atlantic City. Today, we're going to get a little chapter 2 on the road stories. As you may remember from the first one, I caught my first Grateful Dead show in the fall of '72, and was greatly affected by it. And went home and, just went about life as it was until the following spring. That spring, the Dead came back and they played 3 nights at the Spectrum, which was kind of a normal stop. They would play usually 3 nights in Philly as part of their normal tour. So when I went back, in the spring, I had tickets for all 3 nights. And rather than going home, I stayed at the Spectrum. Took a sleeping bag and a backpack and stayed there because I wanted to see what was going on after hours. And it was pretty amazing. You know, the crowds thin out usually within an hour after the show is over. And it'd be around midnight, and the place would just come alive. All the people, that were selling things at these shows out in the parking lot, they would be out milling around and having a beer and whatnot, and everybody sort of had a little, just running around meeting each other and saying hi from wherever they just came from. It was really cool. And I stayed there for a couple of days. Got a great, a great education. You talk to all these different people and they're all doing the same thing. They're all doing it slightly differently, but the end result is, of course, all the same. They're getting from town to town. And the amount of information that you can gather in a place like that was second to none. By the time that I came home, I had a real good idea of what people were doing and how they were doing it. I had an address of a post office box in San Rafael, California, which you could send a money order to this P.O. box with a list of ticket dates that you wanted. The Grateful Dead, now this is 45 years ago. Yeah, every bit of 45 years ago. This is pre-Ticketmaster, this is pre-Live Nation, this is pre-computer, this is pre-everything. And you could send a letter with a money order and buy tickets for any shows that you wanted nationally, directly from the band. As far as I know, the Grateful Dead were the only people that actually did that. I think they were just very aware that they had so many fans that came from city to city, and this opened up an opportunity for these people to get tickets for the shows that they were going to be traveling to. And it was pretty, dude, it was very, very fucking cool. Anyway, so over the course of these 3 days that I was hanging out there, I met the same people that I had met the previous fall. They were back again. And there were 6 people that were traveling around on one, those little short school buses? They had one of them. And, an older one, I guess, that they picked up from somewhere. And they were riding around in that. And the 6 of them would stay in this school bus, and they had, beds set up, and mattresses, and whatever else that a cooler and some ice, and all the things that you could do to survive. And so we got to hang out, and they told me that they gave me their phone number. They were in upstate New York, like I said, in a little town that was in between Poughkeepsie and Albany, right off of the Hudson River and sort of off of 87. And like I said, 50 years ago, this was just wide open, nothing farm country. There was barely even a town there. The town was called Saugerties. There was really nothing there. There was no town at all when I finally did get up there. Anyway, I called them a month later, of course. And, they were there, and I said, and we talked for a few minutes on the phone. And, I mean, well, we didn't even have a phone in the house in those days. The phone had long since been shut off. So I'm literally at a phone booth dropping quarters in every 2 minutes, talking. And, I got an address, and I got a thing, and, there's, call us when you get up here, and blah, blah, blah. And a couple days later, I left. Oh, and they told me, they said, make sure you bring your birth certificate. I'm like, okay, I had no I had no backup plan, so I'm like, sure. So I found my birth certificate and took off and hitchhiked to New York State, which took about a day and a half. And I got an education up there, the likes of which you couldn't put a price on it. They showed me how to do tie-dye, which turned out to be infinitely important in that crowd. And by this time I was 14 when I got up there. And they had asked, after I had arrived and blah, 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 they asked about the birth certificate, and I said yes, I had brought it with me. And I showed it to them. And one of the guys in the house, a guy named Brian, painted, like on canvas, painting. And he got his little brushes out and mixed up some colors that matched. And make a long story short, they changed my birth certificate from 1959 year of birth to 1954. Now, of course, this paint job was not going to fool anyone in person. They took me down to this little grocery store that had a copy machine, and we ran a Xerox copy of the birth certificate, and that looked real. The original one, of course, did not, but that one looked real. And I don't know if I guess if you're younger than me, well, if you're under the age of 45, have you ever heard of a notary public? Because a notary public was a guy, usually a small businessman, that was in business in these small towns, and they would take care of state business. Things like voter registration and driver's licenses and for these remote areas of the country that just didn't have a city hall or didn't have they just didn't, they were these little hamlets. Many of them would have what was called a notary public, and they had this notary stamp that they would put on paperwork, and making it official. To make a long story short, the next day, we went down to a bait and tackle shop, and I think it was in a neighboring town. It was down along the river. And this guy was the notary public. and we went in, and they told the notary, but these people knew this notary public. You know, they had dealt with him before with, you know, with business and things. And they said, look, this is our friend. He's going to be living out at the farm. His house burned down. Everything got destroyed in the fire. He brought a copy of his, he got a copy of his birth certificate from his high school, and he needs to get a license. So the guy looks at the paper. He goes, okay. He says, you don't have any other ID? I said, everything's been destroyed. He says, I happened to ask him, I said, you don't do Social Security cards, do you? And he goes, well, no, you have to go to Albany for that. And I was, okay. And I guess that was enough. And they just started the paperwork to get me a New York State driver's license. And lo and behold, you know, this is, you know, like I said, this is back in the day. This is before computers. They weren't even photo licenses back then. They were just on a piece of paper. They were on a, you know, a piece of cardstock, like a, you know, like a baseball card, just not quite as slick. And they would literally hand type them. And so I came out of there knowing how to tie-dye stuff and had a driver's license. I didn't have a car, didn't have anything, but I had a license, which would come in handy later. Geez, you know, we're really running long here. Anyway, I made my way back to New Jersey, you know, with the thumb, and basically just started gathering up equipment to start doing tie-dye. And eventually, I think every towel and sheet and washcloth in the house and T-shirt had been tie-dyed while I was practicing, trying to get better at it. And I was on the way. I was on the way. And this would have been at the very, in 1973, this would have been? Yeah, this was 1973. So I was on the way. And, well, you know what? I'm going to leave it at this today so I don't run really, really long. No one wants to sit through an hour of this nonsense. But that is the driver's license story. And we'll pick up again in a little while. Maybe over the weekend I'll throw something out. But anyway, thanks for listening. And I'll see you guys again soon, back up on the boardwalk. Bye, YouTube.